no, I agree. I mean, the articulation of anything by this government seems to be gone missing in action. You know, I mean, it's quite obvious to me, John, that this Johnson regime is possibly the most authoritarian writing over civil liberties that we've had in my lifetime. I don't remember anything like this ever happening. You know, I mean, as I said, when I was out at this thing at the weekend on Saturday, on the way down to the beach, just to the beach line, stopped by there was 2 police road checks. One of the police officers, I was driving, pulled down the window, and he says, "Afternoon, sir. Can you just tell me what you're doing?" And honestly, I mean, you know, you have to let the red mist vanish. But part of me's thinking, what the hell is it? Business of yours is what I'm driving lawfully. That's the end of the matter. But you know, you had to say, "Oh, I'm going for a beach picnic," which was pretty much to the point. But yeah, I mean, it does make you wonder, how did we get here? You know, we talked about hard work. You know, John, it's general history. You understand how liberty is. You have to fight very hard to get these freedoms. But when freedoms are taken away, John, I put it to you, they tend not to be given back by government that easily. And we've lost so many of them that's what makes me so anxious and concerned about what lies ahead, because I just don't see these freedoms being brought back.
And I agree with you, David. And you know, it was interesting, wasn't it, that I think it was Professor Ferguson who a couple of months ago said he didn't think that the government would be able to get away with a lockdown, because although they'd managed it in communist China, he and other members of SAGE didn't think they'd be able to do it in a democracy like in Britain. But sadly, they were. And I mean, in some ways, thinking back to how we were all feeling 12 months ago, I think there was a sense of concern, wasn't there? Because we knew what had happened in China, and we could see what was happening in Italy. You know, it was a new disease, and none of us really knew quite what the ramifications were. But you know, my answer to that would have been to say, well, most people actually, because I can remember cycling to work just before the lockdown was imposed. And it was noticeable that most people were not going to work, and buses would pass and they'd be nearly completely empty. And this was before lockdown. So it's like people were taking their own corrective measures. And that is really the best guarantee of liberty, isn't it? Leave the individual to decide for themselves what risks they are going to take. Once you allow the state to make those decisions for individuals, then you are on the road to unfreedom. And I agree, David. I think the government feels fortified by having got away with this. And I think as well, a major part of the problem here is that there isn't an effective opposition, is there?
No.
You know, the Labour Party on the whole, I mean, nearly all the other political parties and the media in particular have all been criticising Johnson for not going far enough and fast enough. And I think that is what happens when ordinary people are excluded from the political process, which is unfortunately what has happened, well, over the last couple of decades, really. But we're really seeing how that impacts now on the loss of personal freedom and liberty.
Well, I mean, that's a great point, John, you make about the fact that the reason that the Conservatives have got away with their awful government is because Labour is even worse. And did you see, by the way, did you see that a Labour MP, I can't remember her name, but today she would not condemn the wanton violence, the attacks on the police officers and private property, which I think resulted in 2 officers being quite seriously hurt with broken bones and stuff. And she wouldn't even condemn it. I mean, this reminds me back in the day. Well, okay, I'm not going into that. This is, what does that say about modern Sir Keir Starmer's modern enlightened Labour? She won't bloody well condemn, all-out assault on the police. Labour MP.
Yeah, well, it's shocking, isn't it? But again, you see, I mean, I think back to the BLM protests in the summer. And I mean, I can remember, and I was fuming about it when I saw the commentary from the BBC reporter about how they were mainly peaceful protests.
Yeah.
And when you only have to look at what the BBC was showing us, and then if you added that to various social media feeds that were available, it was patently obvious they were anything but mainly peaceful. But again, you see that it's not just the Labour Party, which is often almost apologetic for this, but the Tory party does not come out and roundly condemn what's happened. So, for example, when the chief police officer of Bristol effectively gave the green light to the protesters to pull down the statue, I don't remember a single Tory, certainly not a minister, coming out and saying, "Oh, well, actually, I know Priti Patel did mildly rebuke the chief constable, but they don't make a big issue out of it. They ought to be saying clearly, this is not acceptable. The law of the land has to be applied," and they don't. They sit on their hands a lot of the time.
Well, that's right. In fact, actually, following the Colston statue being brought down, you will recall then when the BLM mobsters got themselves to central London, defacing the Churchill statue itself, which is, I mean, that statue over in Parliament Green there, it's iconic in so many ways. And yet, again, there wasn't an initial huge outcry. I think Conservative MPs were thinking, this is a tricky one for us. We don't want to be seen to be against the BLM, but it's Churchill. And, and we've seen the ludicrous situation of, you remember when they put the boxing, they kind of covered up. Well, I thought that I seen that as a humiliation, that
I agree.
We should cover up one of our true great national heroes. And yeah, that was Boris and the gang were behind that one, John.
Yeah, no, I agree, David. And I remember as well, in the wake of the Colson statue coming down, there were a number of other institutions who quietly, on the whole, took down other statues. And, you can criticize them for being weak-willed, and probably a lot of them were, and also a lot of them were inwardly quite woke as well.
Yeah.
But part of me also thinks, well, you've got to sympathize with them because they've seen what's happened in Bristol. And they do not want a mob tearing down their property. So this is why the rule of law is so important, because everybody saw what happened there and realized that these mobsters actually had power. Yep. They had the power to unilaterally take down that statue. Why, by the way, was the statue not put back up?
Yep.
I mean, Bristol had been discussing what to do about this statue for many years, and they had never made a decision to take it down. So had they been true to the democratic wishes of the people rather than the views of a mob, they should have put that statue back up on principle. And the government should have, I'm not saying they could have told Bristol to do that, but they could have said politically, they should have made the argument for doing it, but they didn't.
No, they didn't. No. But actually, I'm just trying to see, John, if I can find it. I did see stuff on social media, which was Antifa UK. Were behind part of the organization, I believe, of some of the violence that we saw. And all the usual suspects. I think it was the Socialist Workers' Party. I think I saw them. They were saying, well, this is, when you stop people peacefully protesting, you got to expect a bit of violence, and again, these people should be comprehensively condemned, and it's just not there. But okay, listen, I want to move on a bit because this is interesting, John. So since we spoke last, you're now the free speech, as well as your other talents, John. You're now the free speech spokesman for UKIP. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I wrote an article in the Conservative Woman explaining why I rejoined UKIP, actually, because I was a member for 2 years between 2018 and 2020. And I went to a few meetings and did a bit of canvassing.
Yeah.
But, during that 2-year period, it was unfortunate that UKIP was rather tearing itself to pieces. So I didn't renew my membership, but I have now. And I was supported by Neil Hamilton when I was being cancelled as a barrister, and I greatly appreciated that support. And having spoken to Neil Hamilton a few times, it does seem to me he has got some very good ideas about how UKIP can put its past behind it and build and go forward. And fundamentally, David, what I think, if then this relates to so much of what you and I have just been talking about. Ordinary people don't have a voice in politics anymore. And I think UKIP actually gave people a voice, didn't they, when they were very skillfully able to marshal ordinary people behind getting us out of the EU. And let's face it, without UKIP, we would probably never have had Brexit. So UKIP just needs to be able to find a way of reconnecting with ordinary people, because they do not have a voice in political debates at the moment. And I suppose for sure I could have stayed as an individual writing articles and intervening in political debates that way. But quite honestly, there's no shortage of people who do that, and I'm not belittling it, because I think it's very important. But I actually think there are probably too many people who do it, and not enough who actually get involved in trying to build a party and a movement that can bring about change. And I think America is a very good example of how you can bring about change with a party and a movement, much as the Republican Party and Trump's MAGA movement has been able to do. And unless we can build something like that in this country, then I fear the worst for us.
Well, you know, John, I interviewed Neil Hamilton about, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. He came on and we had a very pleasant chat. I found him to be. I've met Neil and his wife some years ago, so I find him to be pretty impressive, actually, to be honest, given the chaos that UKIP went through over the last three or 4 years. You know, the sort of revolving door of leaders and all that malarkey. So I found him to be you know, a very pleasant and a nice guy, and I seem to have a vision for UKIP. One of the things I asked him, John, and you can expand on this one now. I remember saying to him, Neil, I just seen on the social media that Katie Hopkins has joined the party. Do you think you'll have a role for her? And being the good politician that he is, he said he couldn't possibly comment on that. And then the next day, or later the same day, actually, out came the word that Katie was on the shortlist for London. She's #1 in London, isn't she? I think, Katie.
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, David. I haven't followed that.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that, from my point of view, that aside, apart from the fact that Neil Hamilton could have told me an exclusive, and didn't. Neil, if next time you come on, I'm going to talk to you about that. But no, London to me is a great one, John, on a serious note, because London sums up all that's worst about Britain and maybe some of the things that's good about Britain, certainly its past and all of that. But London under Sadiq Khan has become, you know, a savage land in many parts of London. And crime has spiraled out of control, John. We've seen terror attacks in London. I mean, there's so little not to like about London. And yet, here we're going to have, you know, elections to the London Assembly. And do you think UKIP can, you know, in this kind of crucible of political activity, do you think UKIP can perform in London, John?
Well, yes, I do. And I certainly hope it does. But look, you see, look, there's only room for one populist party, if you like. And I hope that becomes UKIP. I am troubled. I was troubled actually by the Brexit Party when it set up, what was it, about 2.5 years ago now. And I was troubled by that because, apart from the fact that did actually a huge amount of damage to UKIP, I never believed in a party that didn't have members. And I think a lot of people have overlooked this problem. And now it's rebranded as Reform UK. It still doesn't have members. Anyone can click a box to say they want to be sent information, and that's as good as it gets. You become a supporter or a follower, but you have no say in the organization whatsoever. So the central problem that I want to address, which is how to engage ordinary people, is most definitely not going to be addressed by what is now Reform UK. And neither is it going to be addressed by Reclaim, Lawrence Fox's party. I happen to think, just like Nigel Farage was a good guy, and I think Lawrence Fox is a good guy. And I like a lot of the things that Lawrence Fox in particular has been saying, particularly in his willingness and ability to challenge the woke. But I don't think you can succeed without members. You have to be a sort of bottom-up party which has strong branches, and those branches decide who their representatives are. I mean, again, you see it in America. Trump was only able to achieve half of what he achieved, or wouldn't have achieved half of what he achieved if he hadn't had a movement that was backing him. Because the political class, the media class are very clear about how they want to stop ordinary people having any influence over policy, and you can only overcome that if you involve those people.
Well, you see, that's an interesting point. Now, I agree with that, John, but then there's a question I want to ask you. Trump achieved, I think, an awful lot because he melded the MAGA movement onto the GOP, the Republican Party. And even though in some ways that was an uneasy marriage, and it's still uneasy, I think because the Republican Party is it's a swamp creature party, but the MAGA party movement is a populist movement. And rather than, some people thought, John, that whenever Trump lost the election, honk honk, we're on YouTube. Whenever he lost that election back in November, a lot of people thought, well, maybe he'll go and he'll start his own party, but he hasn't. He's made it clear. I mean, he's absolutely clear that the way forward has to be this alliance of populism and right-wingism. So therefore, John, I put it to you, if you follow that logic, is the way forward not creating a third party like UKIP, or trying to reinvigorate UKIP? But it would not be better for UKIP to somehow get back into bed with the Tories, kind of like MAGA-like, and change it? What do you think?
No, I'm dead against that. I just don't think it will work, because I don't think the Tory party is anything like the Republican Party. There is no real democracy in the Tory party. And this was, let's not forget, this was what was tried just a few years ago. I think it was Stephen Wolfe, wasn't it, and Aaron Banks, who set up this blue wave, or supposedly they were going to have a blue wave to get all the UKIPers and others to infiltrate the Tory party. Well, it failed at first base because the Tory party refused to let those two become members. So, that just shows how the Tory party will protect its own interests. But let's be honest, even if there were 20 or 40,000 UKIPers or people of that persuasion who join the Tory party tomorrow, they would have no say over who their representatives are. The Tories, Conservative Central Office always controls who becomes its MPs, and it is a through and through establishment party. So that's why I think the Tory party has to be defeated. It really does, and it needs a party that can do that. And again, you see, that's why I didn't agree with what Farage did when he stood down. Autocratically overnight, he decided to stand down all his candidates where they were challenging sitting
that was
Tory MPs. I mean, that simply showed that he was only ever interested in putting pressure on the Tory party, not in supplanting it.
And that's a very good point. Yeah, I remember, I'm sure I'm on record saying it, I was horrified. I could see it coming, though. It was, you could, there was a pressure put on him, and he folded. But yeah, I agree with your analysis 100%. Actually, just out of interest, can I ask the stream, as we're chatting, John, if does anyone in the stream think that the Reform Party, being the I was going to say the Farage party, but it's not. It's now the Richard Tice-led party. That's an interesting one. Does anyone think this party has any chance? Just drop your comments as we're chatting here. But I have to say, John, there's this Hartlepool Westminster by-election coming on May the 6th, and you've got Labour choosing an incredibly bad candidate up there, which we'll not go into. But and then you've got the Tories putting up, I don't know if they're putting up the same person. And then you get Tice apparently eyeing up Hartlepool. Man of the people, Richard Tice, will be going up to that northeastern location to spread his easy charm. My concern is this: the Tories will win Hartlepool, and that's going to fortify what I consider to be the Johnson tyranny. And it's so depressing, the prospect. I don't see the Reform Party having any chance. Do you, by the way, either up there or anywhere else?
Well, it's hard to say, isn't it? I think in 2015, UKIP came second in Hartlepool. And I think in 2019, Richard Tice came second, didn't he?
He came third.
Was he third? Oh, sorry.
Third.
Okay.
Pretty close. He was a very close, credible third, John.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. But I think I'm right in saying UKIP did come second in 2015, which was, of course, UKIP's best electoral performance. So I think that shows how the people of Hartlepool, and let's face it, Hartlepool is not dissimilar from many other towns, many other places actually outside of London and the southeast, and where, to be honest, they are heartily sick, aren't they, of both Labour and the Tories. And I suspect if one of them gets in, then it's only because they think they are marginally less bad compared to the other. And, you know, you can only sustain that approach for so long. It's not good for our democracy if people are only voting for a party because they think they're slightly not quite as bad as the other. You know, there has to be a proper, credible alternative that people enthusiastically support. And I think that could be UKIP.
Well, I do. I agree with that. I see actually we have someone, John Newell, who's in the Reform Party, who's on the stream, and John's a good guy, but he doesn't know how the Reform Party will do. For me, the way I see it, that sort of UKIP became, well, certainly with the Farage thing anyway, the Brexit Party took its clothes, took its votes, and then the Brexit Party, essentially like Monty Python's Dead Parrot, has ceased to be. And it's been this Reform Party, which is some decent ideas, just like UKIP, just like the Reclaim Party, just like the For Britain Party. But as is pointed out by somebody here, have we too many, John? Are there too many of these kind of parties? And all it does is just salami slice that particular vote. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there are too many, but you see, so I think there's at least 3 or 4, maybe more parties that are all, broadly speaking, fighting over the same territory, namely to be the proper alternative to the Lib Lab cons.
Yeah.
And only one of them will ultimately survive. But you know that you won't be able to get those 5 to agree.
No.
And you know, I happen to think that UKIP, I'm not saying it's going to, I don't know how it's going to perform. They have said they're going to stand a candidate in Hartlepool. I have no idea how UKIP might do, but I hope it does well. But if it doesn't, I suspect it's probably going to be because there's a bit of media interest over Reform UK and Reclaim, because they're both newish. You know, they've got a lot of money and they're both quite media savvy, but I don't think they'll be able to sustain it. And I think the building of an alternative party is a long-term project. And as I say, it's not even a project that Reform and Reclaim are even seeking to engage in.
Yeah, I think I did a stream on Friday night past with Anne-Marie Waters, For Britain leader, who's a very capable and able lady as well. And again, I find when I listen to UKIP, when I listen to Reform, Reclaim, UKIP, there's very little, I find very little to disagree with. It's just me sort of, it would be wrong for me to say there's any particular ideological, differences. But by the same token, when I look at the opinion polls and I look at what the great British people, where they want to go, John, it's like they have to keep sort of adhering to the Lib Lab con. I mean, that seems to be, it makes me wonder, are we doomed by the stupidity of the voters?
I've got a 2-word answer to that, David. Keir Hardie. The point is exactly the same could have been said over 100 years ago, couldn't it? When you had the Liberals and the Conservative Party. But
Yep.
but they
Yep.
weren't fit for purpose. The political machine was not fit for purpose because you had an emerging working class, and
Yep.
they needed to have representation. And so Keir Hardie set up the Labour Representation Committee, which then became the Labour Party, and they overtook and basically kicked out of British politics the Liberal Party. And,
Yeah.
you know, that took many years, but that's exactly the same sort of process that needs to happen now, because it's not so much the working class which is excluded, unless you want to define the working class in a particular kind of way. But
Yeah.
most ordinary people do not feel as if their voice is being heard at the moment. In fact, we know that the political class is contemptuous of most ordinary people.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that is a situation which cannot last.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, absolutely. The existing political establishment is horrified by the ordinary people. I mean, the fact they've been able to lock them down for a year must give them great pleasure to stop them from being able to go out and say what they actually think. I'm sure that's right. I think what I love, John, about people like yourself and some of the others who come on the stream is you're all so much more optimistic than me, and that's great because I fear I may be just too jaded although I still like to quote that one-liner. You know, what is a pessimist? Well, a pessimist is an optimist mugged by reality. I still think, yeah, that's a good argument as well. You know, but for sure, Britain needs change. We absolutely do. We can't continue. We just cannot go on with what we have, John. That's for sure. And I also would say, and I've said this before, so it's not saying anything surprising. Some of the very nicest people I've met in politics have been from UKIP. I have to say that. I've met loads of UKIP people. Some of you in the stream are UKIP. Others, you know, not. I haven't. The one person I've never really had any deep conversations with is Farage, but then he's too high up. But at ground level, the rank and file, John, that bring the message, they impressed me so much. I've spoken at UKIP meetings, just, you know, on my own topics, but I find them a great bunch of people. But I think UKIP's gone through such a ringer that it'd be really interesting to see, is there a way back from what looked like the abyss? And if there is, then I'm sure having, John, people like yourself, capable speakers and knowledgeable, that's the way to do it, you know. So I think, you know, in summary, I would wish yourself and UKIP well. I do wish the other parties well as well. I just want to see what we have swept away. I want this behind me, this image behind me. It needs to be fumigated. It needs to be fumigated. The ordinary British man and woman whose everyday needs, which have been completely ignored, John, needs to be represented in there. And it's not. It's an embarrassment, don't you think, the comments when you say it?
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, on this pessimism point, David, let's just go back 5 years. I mean, go back to the pre-Brexit referendum. Back before Trump. You know, both events happened in the latter half of 2016, didn't they?
Yeah.
And, you know, both of those events were massive steps forward for ordinary people. You know, that's when the populist movement was seen to exist in Britain, in America, and also more broadly in Europe. And if you look now, you know, Trump lost the election, but he's not gone away. He's certainly in control of the Republican Party in America. And I don't see any weakening for populist ideas in this country either. And, you know, you look in France, where you can see Le Pen is putting up a very good fight, it looks like, with Macron. You know, and all the established parties are finding it pretty much impossible to connect with their electorates. So that gives us hope, doesn't it? There's been setbacks, but if you look at the broader sweep over the last 5 years, it seems to me that there is a movement which is still continuing to go forwards.
Yeah, you're right, John, and that's probably a good note to finish on. I think populism, John, hasn't gone away, and you know, in some regards, when you look at their efforts to sort of clamp down on populism, that's can be for but one reason, because they fear it. And whether it's going to be, whether we see this in France next year when Macron and Le Pen lock horns again, and let's face it, France isn't looking good at the moment. That might be a moment, and we might see it in other countries around the world. But the country I would love to see it most is this one. This is the country that I want to see. All the UKIP fought for British reasserting, getting our sovereignty back, John, as you know, for making this country, to link it back into its proud history and give it a global future. All those things. I don't think those things can be delivered by the globalist cabalists that we have in Downing Street and the Treasury. We need that absolute change. And yeah, let's hope we get it. But John, listen, our hour has gone by way too quickly, which is sadly always the way. But thank you very much for being back on the stream. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us this evening, John. So thank you for being here. Thank all you folks. I've noticed your comments on the stream. And thanks for being part of this tonight. And I shall be back with you in Wednesday night. I've got a lady called Alana Mercer. Google Alana Mercer. She's an American lady, very forthright, hyper clever person. So you should definitely join that one. That's going to go out at 8 p.m. on Wednesday night. So join me then. There'll be other stuff between now and then. But that not someone says not Alanis Morissette. No, not Alanis Morissette. Alana Mercer. ILHANAMERCER. You'll see the thing. Anyway, yes, Alana's really good. You'll enjoy that one. Thanks for being here anyway. That's enough for me. Cue exit. We're done.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.